The first talk today is going to be by Sarah Whitcher Kansa, who is a zooarchaeologist and also editor-in-chief alongside Eric Kansa of the Open Context and Alexandria Archive Institute. And while she, as I mentioned, is a specialist in animal bones, and I've had the opportunity to see her processing millions of them, it seems, Eric is his PhD is in anthropology, and he's emerged in a different way as a very impactful specialist in our field of data policy, informatics, and also ethics of data management and access. And I'm really delighted for the ways in which they are acting to transform our field and the future of the many, many billions of hours of archaeological work that have been committed in the past and ensuring them for the future. So I will turn it over to Sarah and Eric.
Thank you, Lynn. So thank you so much for inviting us to participate in this. We, as Eric gets the slides going here, great. We are actually, neither of us was actually a student of Liz's, so we're a little bit different than most of the people participating in this seminar and or symposium, and we are very grateful to be here. And we would like to highlight ways that Liz has been a true mentor throughout her career, because she didn't just mentor her students, she mentored us and other people who weren't necessarily at UCLA. We were, young grad students when we first met her by participating in the Domuztepe project. And this actually ended up having a huge impact on our lives and our careers, I mean, personally and also professionally. And so we're going to talk a little bit today about the sort of different career path that we took, starting a nonprofit organization and moving away from I'm staying in zooarchaeology, moving away from ceramics and getting into this whole idea of data sharing and data publishing in archaeology to improve the research process and to get all that content out there that we all dig up and need to share with the world. So we are going to highlight, Domuztepe was one of the first projects that that we published data in open context from. And so we learned a lot of lessons about data publishing through this work, because it's a very long-term, complicated project. And so we're going to talk about some of the ways that we modified and developed open context over the years based on lessons from working with the data from project number 3, which was the Domuztepe project in open context. So publishing data from Domuztepe has helped inform open context understanding of digital archaeological documentation and dissemination needs, especially regarding complex multi-year excavations with dozens of participants and ongoing analyses. So again, in this talk, we're going to highlight some of those challenges and the developments that we've made by giving examples from our work with Domuztepe.
And we're going to figure out how to advance the slides here.
It's because you need to click on Zoom again.
Oh, okay, sorry. Anyway, so as Sarah said, that Open Context is a nonprofit publisher of archaeological data and related media. And what we do is we provide editorial curation and peer review services, as well as dissemination services for this kind of content. We're not itself a preservation repository, we're too small for that, but we work with a network of partner institutions, especially with the University of California, with the California Digital Library, the Internet Archive, and also Zenodo. And I also want to highlight our ties and thank the German Archaeological Institute, which maintains a mirror of open context, which is especially good during these sort of crazy times of total uncertainty here in the States. As a nonprofit, we give away other people's data for free, and we put a lot of work and effort into trying to figure out how to do that well. And financing that has always been a challenge. Over the years, we've been mainly grant financed, and then thankfully, we're increasingly been supplemented by the generosity of individual donors, and also now service fees that relate to grant data management. But I really want to highlight also and thank Liz for her steadfast role and all of her support and her networking and her help with just the keeping this going and allowing this program to grow. So it's without Liz, we would have really not even gotten started or manage to continue and flourish in the way that we've managed to do. So her role has been absolutely essential in that. We're referenced by the National Science Foundation and the National Endowments for Humanities for grant data management. And we do a lot of research. Lynn mentioned this and Sarah mentioned this, but a lot of the work that we do is really focused on trying to understand how to make data a more effective and meaningful aspect of scholarly communications more generally. So this is a really interesting multidisciplinary research program that involves archaeology, but also involves libraries and other domain sciences and the humanities. And it's part of a larger program really to try to understand how is it that digital technologies impact the world of research and scholarships much more generally inside archaeology and beyond. So that's something that we find really exciting. And as far as content goes, you can see that 150 or so now data publications, 2 million items, lots of media items, and about 1,000 different authors now have contributed data in open context. And this year we're especially busy because of fieldwork being suspended in a lot of places, and people are sort of sitting around wondering what to do with their time, and they're throwing data sets at us because of the pandemic. Oh, that's you. So one of the things that we haven't tag team presentations too much.
No.
So. Anyway, so just to give you a sense about some of the diversity of the publications that we've done with open context. So Domuztepe is one of the sort of pioneering things that we've published and try to figure out exactly some of the problem space in this domain. Since then, we've done a lot of work on several different projects that have built upon that. And some of these are sort of standalone publications where the project really wants to showcase and make a exhibit really of the work that they've been doing. So the Civitate project in Italy, an Etruscan site, is one of these kinds of examples. And then other examples are more sort of focused on informatics kinds of research, where we explore issues of data integration, some of the ethics and the public policy kinds of challenges associated with that. And that's with the Digital Index of North American Archaeology. And also a large project of integrating zooarchaeological data from several sites across Anatolia. That was led by Ben Arbuckle and colleagues. And that's something that has involved a lot of the sort of informatics kinds of work. As I mentioned, grant data management is also an aspect of what we do. And we've also been supporting several projects on archiving their digitized collections. And one of the other things that we're increasingly involved in is complementing and supplementing more conventional publishing, where we publish data sets that are accompanying publications of either articles or monographs. And so those are the kinds of collaborations that we're engaged in. And again, just to highlight, and we'll talk about some of the background about why we do this, but our current workflow is really focused on providing the sort of editorial curation and cleanup and review kinds of supports that go into publishing. So we see sharing data is not just sort of throwing ugly spreadsheets up on the web, but really involves a lot more in making sure that those data are meaningful and usable by a wider community.
Yeah, and so this brings us to, so how do we get to this point? We started out thinking that just when we finished our PhDs, wouldn't it be great to have a place where we could put our data and other people could access it so they don't have to reinvent the wheel every time they do, and it would help move research along, that you don't have to do all that transcription and analysis again, and you can build on other people's work. And so that was where the sort of idea of open context was born out of. And I think at the time we knew it would be challenging, but we didn't realize just how many challenges it would have, and that this is actually an ongoing and whole new area of scholarship, is working with data, and that it's not just a problem to be solved and fixed with one system, that this is something that's going to need continual exploration. And we all work with digital data now, and so it's something that everyone engages in. And so we appreciate, again, Liz's support in this, because not only did she join our board of directors from the very beginning, but she also has been always supportive of this work. And unlike many others sort of our professors from the former times who asked us, for a while, for many years, people would ask us, so when are you going to get a real job? When we were doing this, that got a little old, and Liz never actually asked us about what were our other plans when we were done dabbling with this sort of data sharing thing. And so we really appreciate that ongoing support, Liz, and sort of unwavering support for this work. So that's us in the beginning. I just wanted to include this because I thought it was a fun reflection of kind of a picture, is worth 1,000 words or whatever. When I pasted this is a picture of us in Domuztepe in August '99, and it's actually the day we got engaged. And when I pasted it into PowerPoint suggested an alt text of a person standing in the dirt. And I thought that was hilarious because that's what an archaeologist is, sure. So it kind of grabbed that concept, but this picture is so much more. And this is kind of like sharing data. You can't just put your data out there and have it be like, this is a bone. There's so much description that is behind the scenes that we need to share. And so this picture actually is a picture of two people, or many people, standing in the dirt, two people who just got engaged, who are gonna are standing in front of the person, that's Liz in the hat behind us, and standing in front of a person who's going to join their board of directors and be a mentor for decades, and who will go off to start this nonprofit organization and do something totally different that's based on the data from this site, the dirt that they're standing in. So I just thought this was a fun thing to share as we move on.
So again, Sarah said that Domuztepe was really one of the first projects that we started with, and it was great start because it was also really complicated. And as you can see, there's a wide diversity of things in it. There's animal bones, coins, excavation features, and stratigraphic units, and human bones, and objects, and things at various different kinds of scales. And all of these different kinds of data come from different sources, curated by different people. So Sarah was one of the primary people creating animal bone data records. Hannah Lau created additional animal bone records, coins from Evan, who's actually, I think, on also. The objects database from Liz herself, features and lots from Stuart. So there was a lot of different kinds of people creating data sets that needed to be aggregated and brought together. And so this is one of the things that was really valuable for us, just to sort of see this diversity and also see some of the workflow issues associated with it. Just again, highlighting some of this. The other aspect of this is so many people involved in a field project like this. So it's not just a sort of complexity of the number and variety of the documentation in archaeology, but also there's a huge complexity in the sort of social structure and how archaeological data is actually created, the social processes behind that. So when we're looking into these kinds of issues, then we have to consider, when we try to deal with archaeological data, there's not just the needs of data creators, but we also have to consider downstream, how is this data actually going to be seen? How is it going to be accessible and navigable by a wider community? So it's trying to reconcile both the interests of the creators who have their own needs associated with creating and sharing and archiving the data, but also wider communities of reusers who will ultimately need to benefit from this. So in terms of recognizing creators, just to highlight it, this is a record from Domuztepe. This is Evan Carlson's description of coins from a late Roman hoard that I think is a bunch of coins of Constantine's family, basically, that was discovered at the site. And what's interesting about this is that these coins were initially described in the small finds database. And then numismatic specialist Evan came in and just further described and add more specialist documentation that was meaningful for his community. But the coins are also related to excavation units, lots. So it's connected into a different data set. It's connected to the photo logs. So there's this huge sort of variety of context that is around the content that Evan himself created. And that's something that we have to recognize and try to manage. So it's not just recognizing individual scholars for their contributions, but it's also trying to show that those scholars and their contributions are linked and contextualized by the contributions of other researchers. And that's just another example of this. So there are several different kinds of data sources that go in behind the scenes for even something as simple as the description of one object. And that's one of the big challenges in archaeological data management is how do we manage that complexity? How do we recognize the people involved in that? And how do we communicate this effectively to wider audiences so that they can actually understand and engage with the information appropriately? One last aspect about this is that we're working with global communities. And as I mentioned earlier, we have a large project in North American archaeology. Some of the people who use open context are coming from cultural backgrounds where the display of human remains is something that is not something, is more problematic than it would be for other communities. And so one of the things that we have to do in trying to provide services for the dissemination of archaeological primary data and media is to navigate these sorts of concerns. And so here's a screenshot where we basically provide an opt-in kind of a mechanism where if you want to see the human remains, you have to sort of agree that this is okay for you to see rather than being shown a skull right away. It's something that we want to make sure that we're recognizing the needs of different kinds of constituencies for using this platform.
So then another concern that we've been spending a lot of time the past few years researching is basically the idea of who's going to use this data, both now and even on projects themselves, but unknown data reusers now and also data reusers in the future. And how do you create data documentation that is going to enable the reuse of data? And so a lot of our research that we've done to date is showing that just archiving data is not enough. There's been a lot of focus on getting data into archives and saying, great, I did my grant data management, I've shared my data. And then when people go in to use that data, they have so many questions and or there's mistakes or things haven't been decoded. And there's all sorts of issues around data reuse, leaving the data to kind of not be useful to reusers. And so we've been working a lot on questions around that. Something even just on this project as an example of data reuse. So I initially went in there and analyzed thousands and thousands of animal bones over many years. Mike Buckley was a student who came to the site, and he later on went on to develop the Zooms method of collagen fingerprinting, being able to tell the species, the genus and species of different animals based on analyzing their collagen. And we collaborated soon after he developed this method. We collaborated on a study where I used the sort of traditional zooarchaeological methods of distinguishing sheep from goat. And we did this on a sample of 25 bones from Domuztepe, which you can see the pictures there. And then Mike took them away and sampled them, and he distinguished between them using his technique, and it lined up really nicely, and it was pretty great to see this actually work, and it was almost like getting your test corrected, which was sort of the first time that was possible. Anyway, what was nice is we were able to link his identifiers for his study that he took away and did at his institution back to the database that has these bones in them. And then he went on to do a bunch of other studies, some of which drew on the bones from Domuztepe. The Domuztepe bones were used in this study that Eric mentioned earlier, the Anatolian Zooarchaeology Working Group, where we participated in a study that brought together more than a dozen researchers, zooarchaeologists working in Turkey, and who linked up their zooarchaeological assemblages in order to study sort of broader patterns of domestic animal use in Neolithic Turkey. And so that was another place where Domuztepe has weighed in on a broader linked data study. Furthermore, Hannah Lau, who is speaking next, has analyzed another set of thousands and thousands of Domuztepe bones. And so she and I had to work together on how to contend with interanalyst variation, and with two analysts coming in and studying the same assemblage, and how we could actually draw on each other's data and be able to confidently work with each other's data moving forward. So that was another issue in data reuse. And then finally, also Max Price, who is another zooarchaeologist, has used the bones from Domuztepe. He went in a few years ago and he pulled a bunch of mandibles and other bones, and he studied pigs and morphological changes in pigs, but also looking at looking at their teeth and seeing what kinds of chemical markers there were in their teeth to look at what their diet was. So anyway, all of these things, I'm just highlighting that one assemblage could have so many different spin-off studies, and it's very, very important to try to keep track of these so that you're not identifying one bone 8 different times when you're actually talking about the same bone. If you could switch. So what has come out of our research, not only at Domuztepe, but working with a lot of different data publications, is that identifiers are really, really important. It's not something that we think about that much. When we do our work, we give identifiers to the things that we're studying, but we don't think about the longer term use of those identifiers and how others might have other identifiers that maybe look a lot like our identifiers that could be very confusing for future reusers of the data. So just to highlight that this is actually becoming a concern broadly, we are participating in this new project that is called iSamples, the Internet of Samples, and it just received a $4 million grant from the NSF to develop an innovative cyber infrastructure that will integrate scientific samples into a digital data ecosystem. So over the next 4 years, this project is going to create a system where researchers across disciplines and throughout the world can share and access metadata on existing samples. And this is not just archaeological, but also geological, paleontological, museum samples, et cetera. So basically, it's building an infrastructure to help maintain the contextual integrity of specimens, and it'll make it easier to track provenance and link different studies made on the same sample. And it also makes open context a more integral participant in a much wider world of scientific information management. So we're really excited to be participating in this project.
Okay, so just wrapping up now, and this is just to highlight some of what we already talked about. But when we first started working with the Domuztepe dataset, we mainly had a mindset of trying to share exactly what we received, and it was sort of a preservation mindset. But over the years, and as we've done these other works that have been building up on that initial work with Domuztepe, we've seen a need to do more than just sort of preserve, but also learn really the essential value of and challenges associated with communicating data. So we've really defined ourselves really as publishers, and we don't just take what's submitted to us, but we work in co-production now with data producers to try to make those data much more meaningful and useful for wider communities. And that makes it really challenging work, but it's also really rewarding and intellectually engaging. So it's not just about technical and metadata geek stuff, but it's also about exploring incentives and funding systems and ethics and usability, all sorts of and also really a lot of the practical realities and challenges associated with field researchers creating data and how to make that actually more meaningful to wider participants. So, and one of the things that just as a sort of a takeaway about all of this is that data curation and editing, the kinds of things that we do, is really about building context. And that's a surprisingly hard challenge, even in archaeology. And that's kind of funny because the notion that context is important seems to be like one of the only things that archaeologists almost universally agree on, right? So everybody says context is important. But if it's so important, it's kind of an interesting fact or challenge for our discipline is that why do we do such a bad job of representing context in the data that we have? Why does it take so much work to tease that out and to reconcile different notions of context when we try to bring together information from different sources? And so we've been doing a lot of work with workplace ethnography, working collaboration also with Willica, thank you, to explore these kinds of topics. And really to try to understand why is it that there are some disconnects sometimes between field researchers and specialists and other downstream reusers in trying to reconcile notions of context from different data sets that people are creating individually and trying to bring together when they try to collaborate. So that's the challenge, even within a single field project, much less a much wider kind of universe. So going back to the big picture, we're seeing that isolated data is not particularly useful or helpful, but whether that's languishing on an individual hard drive or as dead-end supplemental material managed by some commercial publisher, thinking about things really requires thinking about the larger contextual picture. And the starting point with open context, as Sarah was illustrating, there's a little dot right there about where it's starting, and it's growing much larger now. But this is really a decades-long, really multi-generational long research program that we have to engage on. It's not just sort of reconciling context within a single project, but data from one project really helps to contextualize data from other projects, and so on and so on and so on. So all of that takes enormous amounts of community effort in curation to try to really understand how to make meaningful linkages across the information that we're creating on our own individual projects.
Yeah, and just to conclude, we wanted to highlight sort of what next steps are for open context, and we're delighted to have received a grant from the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation just recently that is going to fund a 3-year program of data literacy in archaeology. And we're now in the midst of hiring people, 2 postdocs for to run this program. And basically, this is part of our challenge grant that we have right now at the National Endowment for the Humanities. And so they're matching and bringing in matching funds for this. And it's super exciting to actually be starting to launch this program, which is going to be addressing the issue of that I mentioned about lots of data being archived and shared, but not a lot of understanding about how to reuse it. And so we're hoping to develop a program of multiple layers of access, multiple entries to access to understanding data and working with data so that people can develop skills for actually being able to get at these data sets and be able to tell stories with them and to be able to dig into them without having had to have been part of that project to understand how the data work. And so just to conclude, we wanted to highlight how the social and professional outcomes of our work with Domuztepe are more significant than the data and the technical outcomes. Domuztepe, along with the first few projects we published in open context, have helped really validate a proof of concept and prove that publishing data in this way was not only technically feasible, but also desirable and useful. And we've been continually building on this. So we want to thank Liz. Thank you, Liz, for your ongoing contributions to this work, your constant support and guidance over more than 20 years. And we wish you happiness in your retirement, and we're looking forward to continuing working together.
Thank you.
Thank you.